Hey YouTube, Gordon Miller here. Okay, so I was chatting back and forth with Daniel this morning, who was in my mentor program, and he had an interesting thought. So just like we did a three-dimensional matrix for employees, he was wondering if there was some other type of three-dimensional matrix that you could apply to projects. The three aspects that he offered was urgency, importance, and profitability. And I think that's actually a pretty good insight. And so let's talk about those a little bit. So urgency usually is the other people's urgency. So the trick when doing development work is not to make their urgency your urgency necessarily. Most urgency is artificial urgency. And my father used to consider artificial urgency one of the best sales tactics. It's like, okay, well, we only have 3 of these units left and we're selling about 1 an hour. So if you, don't make up your mind here in the next couple of hours, I can't guarantee you there'll be any left. So when in fact, they probably have 100 units of whatever it is, and they're only selling 1 a day. And it just is one of those kind of things where most urgency is typically artificial. And so I think that while it's a good metric, I don't know that it's necessarily the customer's urgency or somebody else's urgency needs to be your urgency. As far as importance, Daniel is idealistic, and I like that about him. In terms of doing well so that you can do good, and in terms of the importance to mankind and the importance to society and stuff like that, I like that. I admire that. I really don't think that how important something is like that to mankind is necessarily a metric that I would use, but certainly it's one that you can use to evaluate opportunities. I've always been of the opinion that when people had sent me something to look at and they said, well, I want to run a nonprofit or a not-for-profit, or I want to give away 10% of all of our revenue, not even profit, 10% of the revenue to some charitable cause. The whole idea of being a business is to make a profit. So, I've always said, just like they have instructions on when you fly in an airplane that parents should put their oxygen mask on in the case of an emergency before assisting their children. And that's so that the parent survives and so that the children can then survive, have a better chance at surviving. If the parents fiddle with the kids and ultimately they die, then that's a problem as well. So I think that that's an interesting observation. I think importance to society and mankind is an interesting aspect. I don't know that it plays very heavily in my calculations all the time. In terms of the last component, which is profitability, I think profitability is always important. And one of the things I had mentioned to Daniel was that what I've tried to do over the years is look at what would be full-time equivalent FTEs that were working on long-term contracts. So the most revenue we generated, not necessarily the most profit, but the most revenue we generated was when you had 2,000 hours, 1,920 hours, or 1,880 hours at a given labor rate, and you knew you were going to make a fixed amount as long as somebody on the team didn't get hit by a bus. And if you have 10 people working at $100 an hour, then you know what that amount is, and you know what that amount is going to be monthly, and you know what you're going to bill, and you know how to manage your expenses. And typically, I like to see about 70% of all of that, be the total in terms of the balance. And I try to make our number for profitability at 75%. So you still need something else in there typically, or it ends up getting covered out of overhead, or you end up, losing like 5% of the total in profit, which is usually fine because you're usually looking at between 8 and 12% minimum, looking at 20% in profit where you're trying to hit that. The other things that I've tried to do is have between 20 and 30% of the work be firm fixed price. So if somebody comes to us and says, can you develop this for us? And I'll go, sure. That'll cost about $100,000. And so we may be able to do it internally, internal cost for, less than that. But the idea is that we would make a profit on that. And there's nothing wrong with making a profit. One of the things that I had said was, early on when I was first starting the company in 93, 94, 95, I had gotten some advice from another mentor of mine who said, look, if you want to be here 20 years from now to support those customers, and if your customers love you, then, you really have a responsibility to the customer to make a profit so that you can be there for them 20 years from now. And I believe that. I think that's sound advice. And I wish I had followed it a little sooner. And I think that it's important to have that. So, the firm fixed price work typically can have a slightly higher margin, and then the rest of the work would be sort of ad hoc hourly stuff. So if somebody has a project that's 1 to 3 months and it's not going to require a full-time effort, it may require half-time. So you're talking about something less than 6 months, usually 3 months, and you're really talking about 500 hours or so, maybe even 300 hours. But you're talking about a 40-hour week. You're talking about like 8 to 10 weeks or 8 to 12 weeks of work. And usually if it's 40 hours, it's probably 20 hours by one person or 30 by one and 10 or 20 by another. And so it usually takes at least a two-person team to do most projects. Nobody really is very good at doing it all by themselves. So anyway, I think it's an important aspect to consider is what the overall balance is. So you need multiple revenue streams and you need multiple types of contracts so that you can balance those. And so urgency, importance, and profitability, not a bad concept in terms of a three-dimensional matrix of that, but it's it certainly is a way to look at it. So no video today these days would be complete without red Solo cup, full of ice cold water. I love that. And so the other thing that we had been looking at in that discussion was what is traditionally known as the hot to crazy ratio in relationships, and talking about how hot the other person is and how crazy they are. So one of the things that I thought was kind of interesting is it also kind of relates to some of the deals, and you need a third dimension there, and I think sweet is certainly one, sensitive, compassionate, whatever. And I think that, I posted something on Quora about this earlier. I think it's probably less about being crazy and more about personality. So I would like to think of it as, attractive or hot, then the level of their personality, and then how sweet they are, how naturally, wonderful they are. And, typically you don't ever want to peg that at, nobody's a 10 out of 10, but, if you can hit an 8 out of 10 in all those, then you're doing pretty good. Ironically, looking at the personality side, you don't want, too big a personality. If they're at the 9 or 10 out of 10, that may be too much personality. That kind of crosses over into the crazy, area. And then, if they don't have a personality at least as high as a 5 or a 6, then they may be a little more boring, which may be fine if that's your thing. So, but that dimension of physically attractive and dynamic personality, and just how, sweet and wonderful they are is an interesting way to think about it. So I'm going to also look at how we can apply those same kind of metrics to business deals. A lot of it has to do with the relationship between you and the other partners in the opportunity. So, I think that the personality of the founders is important. Frankly, I think how the founders look, whether or not they look good on camera, or whether they look good in photos, or whether they look good up in front of, pitching for their next deal, I think plays a lot in that role. And I think that also, if they're genuinely nice people and things like that, it tends to play a role. So I'm going to give some more thought to that. I'm continuing to work on the 2 books that I have been working on for a while now. Finally getting some time to look at those in more detail and pulling that information together. So that's something that I think is an interesting part of that. It's horrible to think of entrepreneurship and and private equity and venture funding, a lot like, tender for companies. But, unfortunately, it is a lot like that. I mean, it's really about how you come across and, how convincing you can be and things like that. So I think it's just one of those kind of things where I think companies that are looking for opportunities, the ones that have, very attractive, well-spoken, intelligent, and really kind of sensitive people, I think tend to do pretty well. And that's just kind of my observation. So I'll think about it some more. But look, thank you all very much. I appreciate it. And have a great day.